Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandy NP. Each episode will bring you a new topic or interview related to brain health and wellness as part of my mission to help you on the path to a healthier, happier brain. So, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. My guest today is Gina Rolkowski. Drawing on her 19 years in recovery, coupled with her years of teaching experience and leading workshops on social and emotional learning, Gina helps abuse survivors overcome the life-altering impacts of abuse and discover hope and joy by teaching them how to nurture a relationship with God and themselves. Gina helps her clients feel safe, seen, and supported while teaching them life skills to break through shame, fear, and anxiety, and build a peaceful, playful, purposeful life using the 5 keys on her Bridge to Breakthroughs program. Gina is a wife, mother of 1 grown daughter, huge Philly sports fan, and passionate about serving others and the power of God's unconditional love. Welcome, Gina, to the show.
Thank you for having me, Mandy. Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited for our conversation today. So I always start off, my first question is just, what's your story? Why does brain health interest you? Got a little bit of that in your intro, but you go into a little bit more.
Sure. Well, brain health really interests me way back before I even was aware of my own abuse history, because I have what was known as childhood amnesia. So I didn't remember a lot of my experiences growing up. Like, I knew where I lived and where I grew up, but I couldn't tell, I was like, oh, I don't remember a lot. So before I even had the flashbacks and memories of being sexually abused as a child, I was working as a teacher, and I was in recovery because I had been a drug addict and was an alcoholic, and I had been abused by my ex-husband. So I attributed like all of my trauma, not realizing that there was years before he even came along, and I was still struggling. But at any rate, how I really got interested in the brain, it was because I was working as a teacher, and I actually started before, when I was in graduate school, learning about the brain and behavior related to children. Mm-hmm. And there was a program called Conscious Discipline, and Dr. Becky Bailey was the founder of it. And I was highly trained in that, and was so amazed at learning how so much of who we are and how we respond is related to what's going on in our brain. And it was so fascinating to me to learn, when you're in our brainstem, we're in survival and flight, we can't learn, you don't teach someone to swim when they're drowning, how important it is to feel safe, how to feel safe. And when you do that, you're accessing the part of the brain where learning and change can take place, and new patterns and neurotransmitters. And I started using that program, Conscious Discipline, in my classroom. And I always worked in Title I schools. So my kids were always, low income and really struggling. And so I always got some of the real tough ones, so to speak. And I just saw miracles in my classroom based on some of the things that I used, like eye contact, touch, teaching them, I had a safe place in my room, and we learned self-regulation, and we always did breathing. So it's kind of funny how my experiences as a teacher and learning about the brain and behavior with that program really helped my own brain healing without realizing that that's kind of what was happening. You're mirroring the neurons and all that stuff. So, and the more I learned about that, and then when I had my own experience, my flashbacks started as a child, it was helpful for me to not feel crazy, mm-hmm. because I realized that PTSD is a brain injury, not an illness, and so it was like, for so many years, I thought I was crazy. So it was so comforting for me to learn, oh, I'm not really crazy. I just don't know how to self-regulate, and my brain is kind of stuck. And so, it made it a lot more palpable to heal than to just think I was crazy. So that's kind of how my own, experience with, and learning to self-regulate and learning, what works for me in my own journey of recovery and healing really helped me, to transform, my flight or fight, my screaming and yelling, my, like, all the behaviors that I did to basically get my needs met. Mm-hmm. It made it easier for me to unlearn them and relearn new experiences so that, I'm not living like that anymore.
Yeah. So tell me about that moment when you started having those flashbacks. What was going through your mind?
It's such an awful thing to think happened to you that I mean, I knew how to stop a flashback because I had had flashbacks from my ex-husband being abusive. So I knew, like, okay, with your toes lower, the eyes open, that was then, this is now. But it was, I mean, it's so incredibly shocking. And I think the biggest thing is, that I didn't even realize at the time, but the more I went through my own healing, was how incredibly sad it is to think that I was a child and needed these people to keep me safe and love me. And they didn't, so a part of me was really struggled with realizing that, like, my parents didn't love me, and that was the really learning to tap into the grief and the anger around that was so important, because I think that's the real deep thing about being abused as a child, especially when it comes to sexual abuse. But and not that there's a tier of, like, trauma,
Right.
but it's that how you're not safe, like, but you're still a little girl inside as an adult who wants her mommy to love her, and so you repeat all these things in your relationships to try and get your mommy to love you, and you do all the things you did that they did, and then you realize, oh, this, I'm crazy and I'm never gonna have horrible relationships, and so I think really that was the I mean, it's just such a shocking, horrible thing that you did. I think it's why people get away with sex trafficking and the things that happen in the world today, because of plausible deniability. You're like, oh, what kind of father would like, really? I mean, like, that's so awful that nobody would do that. And it's like, but it happens a lot.
Yeah, it does, unfortunately. I can't imagine trying to go through that, uh, even as an adult, but as a child too. What kind of support did you need once those things started happening and you realized what actually happened when you were a child?
I was really, really grateful that I had a really great therapist who, she and I did some EMDR, which is really helpful. But I also think that it's really important to have a therapist who really, there's so many therapists out there like, oh, I'm trauma informed. And it's like, no, but one of the things I was very grateful for is that she realized that I was still dissociating, because I had seizures from the time I was 14 until I was like 35 or something like that, like 20 years. And I mean, I had brain surgery and I was on drug, like, you name it, I had done it, and nothing stopped them. But I realized now, and at the time when I started having the flashbacks, that they were really dissociative seizures. They were really a protection. Some people have the DID, dissociative identity disorder, and they switch, and I just had seizures, and I just was like, they were never grand mal. I had one grand mal, but but when she realized that I was still dissociating, she said that she felt like she wasn't even qualified to help me, and she referred me to somebody else who really was much more trauma informed about dissociative, dissociation and all that kind of stuff. So that was really, really helpful. And then I had to move, which was really bad. So that was hard, because then I went through, like, all these different therapists when I moved. And when you have one who does know what they're doing, when you have one who doesn't. Absolutely. And cognitive behavioral therapy is the worst thing you can do for somebody who has, like, chronic complex PTSD, because you're basically not operating in the body, you're operating in the mind, which is, the brain is literally like, it's injured, right. So you're re-traumatizing yourself telling the story. So having the support of a really good therapist, and also, I was in a 12-step program, and I have always had a very strong relationship with God, and I believe 100% that is what helped me, especially during the times when I didn't have the support by a therapist. And there's a great book by this psychiatrist, Dr. Timothy Jennings, who wrote the book, The God-Shaped Brain and the God-Shaped Heart. And he also wrote the book, Could It Really Be That Simple? But it's all about how having a relationship with God changes the brain. And and I didn't, like, read that book and go, oh, I think I'll have a relationship with God. You know what I mean? It was like, so I think, like, I always felt like I could go to God for support. and then I could rest my head in his lap, and then I could cuddle up, and and that was like basically forming a secure attachment, which was also a part of healing my brain, which I just didn't know at the time.
Mm-hmm. So that faith discovery became huge.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I mean, I grew up as a Catholic. I'm not a Catholic anymore. And but as I was, I always felt like as a small little girl, like that I just had this relationship with God somehow. I don't know how else to say it. It always felt, I can remember being on my swing in my backyard and just being like, oh, me and God, like, hey, like, what's up? So, it, the funny thing was there was a time in my life when I like went into AA, and I was initially out of about my inpatient treatment, and I had really started going, no, I'm going to go back to graduate school, and I'm going to take care of myself, and my relationship with God really fell to the wayside, and I was really negatively impacted because everything became about being successful and not being crazy and having a career. And I remember walking in the halls as a teacher one time, I'm like, gosh, I don't spend that much time with God anymore. Oh, well, and it just didn't, and then the flashbacks happened, and I wasn't able to work anymore because the trauma healing was just was just had to be the priority.
Hmm. So you going through that experience, help others kind of find that faith in as part of the process of healing. How did your experience shape that?
I think my experience shaped that because one of the things that I took for granted was that everybody else knew that, and I remember this was probably 18 years ago when I was, leading a meeting at one of the AA meetings, and it was an 11th step meeting, or was a third step meeting, but one of them, about, having a relationship with God and turning it over to him and all that. And sorry, it's been several years since I've been doing 12, so I'm like, I should really know that stuff, but I know it's the third or the 11th, but at any rate, and people started coming from like all over when I was leading these meetings, and I started talking about how, it's what I do, today with clients, is help them make this relationship with God extremely personal. Like, when we have relationships with people, we have a relationship, we do our, like, you get mad, you're not mad, you talk to them, you hug, you work it out, like you spend time with each other. That God is the same way, and so I really, I was leading one time, and I said, it was really important to me to make God so incredibly like relatable. So I said, when I spend time with God, Jesus, he wears jeans and t-shirts, and we walk on the beach and he rolls up his jeans, and it's like, are you wearing Levi's, or what do you? So like, those are the things that I really help my client make it super duper personal, because that's what God, God is our unconditionally loving Father. And the other thing is, I think that people don't, one of the, like I said earlier, it was horrible to think that I wasn't loved. Like, we all really want to be loved unconditionally. And that is something that God offers us. And so when I was able to go, oh, like, all I have to do is kind of close my eyes and just like go and be with God, like he's going to hold me. And I do a lot of visualization, where is he holding you? Are you laying your head on his lap? Really, because, think about it. It's my neighbor with this motorcycle. I'm so sorry. Oh my God.
It's okay.
Sorry.
I'm not going to hear that with our snowstorm going on. So
okay. Anyway, but these are the things that you think about, like when you're like cuddling with your husband or your partner, and or you're holding your children. You know what I mean? The most special times are when you're just literally just being with each other, and how do you be with God, and really making it concrete and personal, and helping people with that is like one of the biggest things that I love doing, because it creates a lot of the change in the brain and your life and this and the other thing, without going, oh, how do I do that now? Okay, so I do, like because there's, there was a time when I first went in recovery, and I wasn't working. I was like just freaking out. Like, what am I going to do? I'm in therapy, blah, blah, blah. And I took, all I was doing was like taking baths. Like I would take like 3 baths a day, and I'd call my therapist and be like, I don't know what to do with myself. I mean, she was like, your job right now is to stay off drugs. I don't care what you need to do, you know? So it was like, oh, you know, there's this like journal, breathe, take a bath, go for a walk, blah, blah, blah. And the one thing that I love about my time with God is that it takes like all of those things, and I just get to like let go, and it still has the same impact on my healing, and even more than, you know, and I'm not saying like don't journal, like I'm not saying don't do those things. I'm just saying that this is, you know, you have to find what works for you. But that is, you know, is it, I also will like journal after I spend time with God if I feel the need to or whatever. And yes, I do my breathing and wiggle my toes, but it's just, you know, that's kind of how I help others to really experience like God's unconditional love, because it's one thing to like know God loves you, it's another thing to experience it. And I really want people to experience that, because it's really the healing piece of all of this. I think, you know, you're a little kid and you want your mommy, you know, and then I see like even my own relationship with my husband, it's like, oh, or even my daughter, I just realized like recently, I was like, oh my God, like I'm still doing the things I wanted with to get my mommy to love me. And I'm like, I don't need my, you know, it's just interesting, you know, to see, well, okay, I am always unconditionally loved.
So often I hear my patients telling me that they believe that they have gotten through things because of their faith in God. So
Yeah.
it's a strong, powerful motivator to keep people going.
Yeah. And I think it's just like so misunderstood and misconstrued. You know, I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you, like, I didn't even want to be doing this because I was like, oh, people are going to think I'm a weird Bible bouncer. Now, I am a Bible believer. I love my Bible. I love God's word. But all of the perceptions I've seen, you know, of these crazy people, it's like, oh no, now I'm going to be, you know, and it's like, you know, when you really get to know some of those people, you're like, oh, they're really not so weird at all. You know, like it's like, oh, they're actually like pretty happy, content people, even though they may not be driving the like, you know, Escalade and like making $1 million. It's just like, you know, so it's, I think too, it's my relationship with God is really what healed my seizures. I mean, because my doctors had done everything. Like I said, brain surgery, vagal nerve implants, drugs, everything, you know, and I joined a charismatic prayer group and started really experiencing the power of God and the Holy Spirit. And I was like, oh, you know, I was praying and praying that they would stop, and the doctors were like, well, what happened? And I was like, I don't know. I prayed about it. And like, and I always feel weird to say that, because I know like people pray and pray for people who don't get healed of cancer or whatever. And so I have to believe that, you know, God's ways are not my ways. And so if I try to understand it, I'm going to miss out. You know, like when we're with our husband or our wife or our kids, we don't, you know, get out a book and go, let me understand you. Oh, okay. Wait, let me look that up. Okay, you know, you're just like, hey, you know, the hugs, play games, kisses, eat dinner, whatever it is. And I think that when we try to like go, well, wait, let me understand this. God, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, but you're not supposed to understand God. Like, stop trying, because you're not gonna. Like, you're missing out on a lot of stuff because you think you have to understand it to believe it. Like, I believe in love. Do I understand it? No.
Right.
I mean, my husband gets on my nerves every once in a while. I don't go, no, why am I still with this dude? You know what I mean? Like, so I think that we forget that love, you know, like you can't stop trying to understand. Like, if we had to experience everything only if we understood it, think about how many things we'd miss out on.
We don't all understand everything about life.
I don't understand how the leaves change outside. Like, okay, I mean, I'm just science, but I'm like, wow, man, I don't go, let me get my science book out here. I just go, wow, look at the cute, beautiful tree out there, you know? So that's my little thing.
Yeah. Some things are not meant to be understood. They just are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe that as well. But that faith process is huge. Other than your faith, what other things are you doing to improve your brain these days?
Well, I mean, I work out like 4 days a week. And I do think that and I'll be honest, I don't like to work out. I think that's the other thing that I learned. Like, one of the things I thought about self-care was that like self-care was all like bubble baths. and like journaling and getting a pretty journal and like drinking your nice tea. And it was like, oh, self-care is like being the parent that you need to be for yourself, that that says it's time to put the phone away and go to bed. You know what I mean? Yep. Like, I mean, there are times when I wish I did have a decent mom who would go, okay, Gina, it's time to put your phone away, go work out, but, so I do work out. I have this app on my phone called Abide, and it's a meditation app. And I spend, I always spend my meditation time with God in the morning. One of the things that I also do is, that has really helped me is I've learned a lot about the trauma triangle and learning how to, become my appropriate authority, be more compassionate, changing my inner critic and really being able, like I was telling my husband the other day, he's trying to like lose weight, and food is his only source of joy and soothing. And I was like, babe, you got to find another way to self-soothe, because you'll do something else if it, you know what I mean? Like you're going to be worse. And I was telling him how, I mean, it's so funny how feelings, like I always say, feelings are like a new pair of shoes. They're very uncomfortable at first, you gotta like really stretch them out and be like, okay, I know this one, but, I was telling him, like, I've learned to, if I'm doing something new, especially, or I'm feeling uncomfortable, learning how to really talk to myself and go, okay, one of the things that I found super helpful early on, and I'll still do when I need to, is to like get back in my body and literally like I wiggle my toes. Wiggling my toes is one of my favorite things, because breathing, when I was first in recovery, my therapist used to say to me, just breathe. And I just wanted to be like, F you, like, don't tell me to breathe. Like, and I never understood it, because I was like, well, if I'm not breathing, I'd be dead. So I don't even know what you're talking about. Of course I'm breathing, Right. So like wiggling my toes always helps me just like really breathe when I don't feel like going, let me take some deep breaths. I don't feel like it. I just want to be like, but so I do like that's something that I do, but really having a chance to like explore, like, how do I feel in my body? Like, where is the feeling in my body? What does it look like? That
That's okay.
Sorry. I can let him in, or I can just, but at any rate, but like one of the things I've noticed is the more that I've done some of the things that I didn't want to do, like one of the things I used to do early on, like several years ago, was just get up and be like, what am I feeling and where is it in my body? And that was, I think it's really important, especially at first, to keep it simple, because you could go on Instagram and find a bazillion things you can do for your brain. And then it's like, oh, now I'm just a mess of all these things I need to do. And I really learned to be like, I'm going to pick one or two and see what works for me. Okay, I like that, or I don't like that. But, really kind of checking in, transforming that inner critic. I also eat pretty well, but I also don't restrict myself. Like on the weekends, if I want something, I'm going to eat it, so I think like learning like flexibility and organization and all of those things have been really helpful. And really learning to tap into like, what am I feeling, even if it's really awful and hard?
Yeah.
Because then I don't have to like overcompensate for the horrible feeling by overworking or drinking or whatever it is,
Yeah, absolutely. That idea of just being mindful about your feelings.
Yes.
Several episodes I had a friend on, and we talked about mindset and mindfulness, and it just being mindful of where your feelings are. What are you feeling today is a huge step toward just knowing yourself.
Yeah.
And knowing what you need to do for yourself.
It's weird how much of our behavior is driven by our feelings. And like, I think I even have a chart that I made like for clients at one time that was like, what am I feeling? What do I want? How can I meet that need? You know what I mean? Because like, and the other thing is, one of the phrases I used to tell my kids all the time when I was teaching, and I've had to tell myself, is I can handle it. Because that's another thing that's helped me go, well, this sucks, but I can handle this. I don't like it, but I can handle it. Like, because there are times when it's, you're in a tough spot and you're just like, oh, and it's like, man, like, okay, I'm going to acknowledge that this really sucks. And, but I can handle it. Or just reminding myself like, this will pass, but I think it's really important to be mindful Um, because if you don't, like, you're going to just operate from that part of the brain that is so automatic, that only knows what you were taught by the people who hurt you. And then you just keep doing it. You just you become your own abuser, and you just go around in circles. And it's like, I was talking to a friend who was in the trauma group I was in for years, not too long ago. And we talked about how it's more difficult now to abandon ourselves by allowing things or doing things we know that aren't best for us than it is to do them. It's like, now we know, oh man, that would be totally abandoning myself. I'm not, it's going to be even harder than not doing what I know I need to do, that hurts. So that's, and I really think that having a good support for trauma work and health and brain and all that, it's just, and it's just so incredibly important. I have a contact at the Amen Clinic. I don't know. Do you know about the Amen Clinic, Dr.
I do.
Yeah. And so, he helped my son-in-law, he's done a lot of, and he actually is a very, very spiritual Christian, and he has a book called Stones of Remembrance, which is a really great book. And it's just scriptures for like when you feel anxious, angry, whatever, and you just open it up and it's like, so I think those things also help, but nobody talks about how they help.
Yeah.
Brain. It's like, oh, there's weirdo religious people. And it's like, well, all right, they put Jesus on a cross. What do you want from me? Like, what am I mean, why should I be any different? But I've really had to literally be like, well, why do I expect my life to be any different? So there you have it.
Good point, honestly. Very good. Yeah, I've actually heard a lot about the Amen Clinic lately. I've interviewed a couple other people who have been trained through them. So they're doing some fantastic work too. So yeah. With that in mind, are there kind of one or two things that you could tell our listeners that they can do right now, kind of wrapping up what you were just talking about as well, that they can do to help their brains right now?
I would say that, number one, I would say I don't think it's quite as hard as people think it is to help your brain. You know what I mean? So like, don't underestimate the power of, when it comes, one of the best things, and I think not hard, maybe not easy, but not hard things to do, is to really check in with yourself. Get up in the morning and go like, how am I feeling and where is it in my body? And then just, go, because that gets you out of the brainstem where your fight, flight, freeze is on, you're fawning, or you're gonna cry your eyes out because you're depressed. It's like, okay, but something very, very simple, even just getting a journal and writing down, today. And the other thing is, I would say, is remind yourself you can feel more than one feeling. Like, it's not like I only feel anger or I feel happy. It's like, okay, I can be angry and I can be happy, So I would say really start checking in with your feelings, because it gets you out of that part of your brain where you can't learn anything and you're just stuck. And, as crazy as it sounds, if you find yourself in a spot where your brain is really like on high alert, wiggle your toes. You'd be really surprised. Like, even I'm doing it right now and I can see just take a breath and it's like, wow, the toes are like really powerful. And I love that because it's super simple and you can do it anywhere, obviously, eating well, exercising, drinking water, the physical pieces of it. But and I think the only other thing I would say is to really start to have a personal relationship with God. Like, however you want to do that, make him personal, talk to him, hang out with him, lay your feet, rest your head in his lap, just, float in the ocean, whatever you want to do. Like, just close your eyes and just be like, I can't do it on my own. And just allow yourself to feel loved, because that will help heal that part of your, heal your brain and keep it healthy too.
Yeah. Yep. Do you ever get clients, or did you ever have a time when you're trying to heal from recovery and that recover from that trauma, and you just feel anger at God because how did he let it happen?
I personally, I mean, I'm sure that I might have, but I think that, like, somehow I have always felt so safe. Like, God has always been my safe place, that I never wanted to necessarily I somehow knew that, like he says, he works everything out for our good and his glory. And so I never was like, hey, God, it's really okay. I don't mind. Golly gee, you're the best. Like I never, it was like, there were times when I was you, you just, if you were here, man, um, but and I'm sure there certainly are people out there, because you hear things all the time, like, well, if God really loves us, like, why would he do this? And that comes back to, for me, my personal experience, and what I tell clients is, God tells us, my ways are not your ways. Lean not on your own understanding. And at the same time, you have to think about, as you're a 5-year-old kid or you're a 3-year-old kid, and you want the dessert, or you want to keep watching TV, and your mom is like, no, and you cry your eyes out, and you're like, you're so mean, I hate you, I can't stay out in the dark and play with my friends, like those are times when that doesn't make sense to you. You're like, but I'm having a great time, this is really fun, I want to eat so why can't I have candy every night? Well, it would hurt your teeth. I don't care, so I mean, it's very minimalized when you say it like that. But I think that, like, for example, like, there were years when I prayed with God to get back with my ex-husband. And I mean, thank God, he was like, yeah, no, like, you know what I mean? So I would never say don't be mad at God, because it's a relationship. Like, you have a right to be like, really, like, this sucks. But I would never, I mean, it's kind of like my husband. Okay. I love my husband. I love my daughter. Do I get angry at them? Yes. Do I abandon them totally and go, F you, I'll never talk to you again? No. So I think it's just, when it comes to anger with God, well, no, duh. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I don't divorce my husband just because I get angry, because there's other benefits. You know what I mean? So I would, I think that you just have to talk to bring your anger to him. Like, he's a big guy, he can handle it. He knows how you feel. I mean, I've even said, Jesus was sweating blood in the garden. Like, he was like, Father, to take this from me, like, please don't, like, he knows, so I think that there's this, like, like, positive, toxic positivity crap of, like, no, God, like, this is so good for me. And so it's okay. Like, it's not okay. Tell him.
Yeah. I love that explanation, actually, because I do hear a lot too. Well, why would God let this happen to me? And it's not all God's work, but he is there to help us through things too.
Well, right.
So,
yeah. I mean, I think that God, like, we had this a church on Sunday, the pastor was talking about the time that Jesus sent the apostles out in the boat, and there was a storm, and then, Peter freaked out and was like, oh, and it's a ghost. And he was saying, God permits the storm. God's presence is in the storm, and then you have to have perspective about the storm. Like, you think about, like, Peter, like, was able to, like, see how strong his faith was and walk on the water. And, and it's funny, like, if you think about the personalities that we all have, like, only a risk taker like Peter, would be the one to go, oh, I'll get on the boat, like, there's, there are people in the corner going, whoa, but God didn't go, you little losers, get on the water. He knows who they are and what their personality, and, so I think, like, when it comes to the storms, like, this is what I tell my sister all the time. It's not heaven. Like, this is not heaven. It's not supposed to be, like, and I often think I should change my own wording in my business about having a peaceful, playful, purposeful life, because, you would like to have mostly a peaceful, playful, purposeful life, but people die, people get sick, you get a flat tire, friends, would betray you, whatever. But it's really just being able to have a level of peace in that, like, you're not going to fall apart. And you're not going to end up in the psych ward, or you're not going to end up curled in your corner of your bed crying every day, and I think that those, God doesn't go, okay, you are going to get sexual abuse, you're going to lose your parents, it's not heaven. Like, it goes back to stop trying to understand. Like, I think that there's a peace in just going, I'm not supposed to understand. God knows. Like, hopefully someday I'll be in heaven and it won't be this way. You know what I mean? It sounds very simple, but I think it really is something that has helped me just be like, I can't fight against what is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I tried so long to fight against absolutely everything my whole life that when I finally was able to stop fighting and controlling and making people believe me and defending and explaining, it was like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
I don't need you to believe me. I don't need to explain myself. I don't need to defend myself. Like there's such a great deal of freedom in that is obviously helpful to your brain because you're not constantly like this, getting the oxygen stuck and being stuck in the fight. I got to tell you, and you don't believe me. And it's like, oh, I don't need you to.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be tootling along up here in my prefrontal cortex.
That's a great explanation, though. I love that. So what are you up to these days? How are you working with people? How are you helping people?
Well, I just actually over the summer, I just redid my whole website and I'm starting to offer a lot more things because there's so many different, it's hard to trust somebody when you've been abused, I mean, you got to get a little piece of them go like, oh, can I trust this person? So I recorded a 5-day meditation series that's free on my website for people that helps do some of the things that I talked about. I have a mini course that's on my website that has worksheets and stuff that you can download and do. I have a 3 weeks of breakthrough mini series coming up starting next week. Just a little holiday kind of breakthrough, support. And then of course I always have my coaching that I do. I do a 4-month program and then people can always continue if they need, if they'd like to do that. And I'm hoping to start a book study in January, only because I kind of think that, lots of times it's like, oh, I'm going to lose weight and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And it's like, the bears hibernate. I would like to read the book Sacred Rest by Dr. Sandra Dalton and have a book study for that. So I think that's pretty much what's going on right now. I'm almost finished writing my book too. So I'm excited about that. So hopefully I can get that published next year sometime.
Yeah. Awesome. Great.
It doesn't have a title yet. It still doesn't have a title, but it's right now it's literally just book in my computer. Book.
It'll come. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I don't write the titles for the episodes until afterwards because it comes to me afterwards.
Yeah, too. Exactly. You don't know. I mean, I'm literally on chapter 8 and I'm like, I have a great theme in this book, but I still don't know what to call it.
It'll come. God will help you, right?
Yes.
Very good. Any last tips or tricks that you'd like to discuss before we wrap up here today?
I think the only thing I really want to say when it comes to the brain and trauma or addiction or anything like that to really just remind people that it's kind of like an injury, that can be worked through. You're not a crazy person. Your brain is just, it's like the muscle that, oh, you go to the gym and you're like, oh man, I can't, the more you use it and the more you work at it, the more peace you're going to experience in your body, mind, and spirit, just by kind of helping that part of you that runs everything pretty much. Mm-hmm. So I would just really encourage anybody out there who's listening, don't forget about your brain. It's a big piece of this, we're body, mind, and spirit, and the brain is the big piece of please incorporate that as a part, if not the biggest part of your healing, and change the perspective of why you do what you do and watch the healing happen.
Yeah. Great closing remarks. Great. Where can people find you if they want to learn more?
They can find me at my website, GinaRolkowski.com, and I'll spell that because nobody can get Rolkowski. It's weird, but anyway, it's GinaRolkowski.com, GinaRolkowski.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, same name. So that's really the best places to find me: Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Yes.
Perfect. And I'll include all that in the show notes as well.
Great.
So, great. Thank you so much for your time, Gina, today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Mandy. It was really nice. It's been a long time since I talked about the brain. So it was really kind of fun. I feel like I'm going back to when I first was in graduate school and I was like, oh, I'm going to learn all about that. It was it was like, this sounds really cool. So
yeah. Yep. I love talking about it. So here we are.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Also, have a great day.
You too.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, like, and share this with others to help me continue on with my mission to help people live healthier, happier lives. Go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to see what I'm up to and get links to all the social medias there. See you next time.